Good morning. I hope everything's going great for you today and that this is going to be a tremendous week that is before us and that things are just going to fall in place for you this week. It'd be a great opportunity for you if you live in the Lone Oak area this coming Sunday to worship with us. We'd love to have you come and just be with us for our Bible class at 9:30 and worship at 10:30. And if you can come and share in that study, Lord willing, this Sunday we're going to do the first of a two-part lesson on how we exceed the scribes and the Pharisees in our righteousness. Jesus, in the greatest sermon ever preached, said, unless your righteousness surpasses or exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you're not going to enter into the kingdom. So we're going to look at the first half of how Jesus described the 6 ways that we have to exceed the scribes and the Pharisees. It really all followed right there in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, with 6 statements that would follow. You've heard it said by them of old time, but I say to you. And these would lay out the 6 ways that we have to exceed the scribes and the Pharisees in our righteousness before God. Well, think with me today, though, on a great question. We've been looking at great questions, a lot of different questions that arise in our life all the time. And today I want to look at one that is, I think, challenging. And that is, can we really overcome when there are just so many problems? When it seems as though we're overwhelmed with difficulties in life, can we really overcome all of that? You know, I think about so many times in the Bible's history when things seemed entirely hopeless until God stepped in. There were so many times with like Abraham and his descendants and the children of Israel that things just felt like there was no way out. I mean, it became awful. Think about when your whole country has spent 430 years in slavery in Egypt. Would you feel like maybe things looked hopeless? We think about our country and celebrate our anniversaries every year at the 4th of July, and we just had another one, and we're thrilled to be around a little over 250 years of age. But they stayed in slavery for 430 years. And then God raised up a leader, a man named Moses. Now, it's true that Moses had thought 40 years earlier that he was the one to lead the Israelites when he came out after being raised in Pharaoh's house. And he thought the Israelites understood. He was going to be their leader and going to be the one that would lead them out of that Egyptian bondage. But they didn't. They didn't believe that. When he tried to put himself in that place, one of the men said, who do you think you are to lead us? You're going to kill me the way you did that Egyptian yesterday? And he fled for his life. For 40 years after that, he worked for his father-in-law, Jethro, as a shepherd, worked out in the desert area much of the time. As a matter of fact, he led his sheep around Mount Sinai. And it was there in that very area where he was leading his sheep when God appeared to him one day in a burning bush. And the bush was burning, but it wasn't burning up. And so Moses drew close to look at that bush that just kept burning. And as he got close, God spoke, "Take your shoes off. The place where you're standing is holy ground. And then God called Moses at 80 years of age to say, you're going to be the leader. You're going to be the one that goes back and leads my people out of that Egyptian bondage that they've been in for all of these years. Now, Moses couldn't believe it. You know, I'm 80 years old. And he said, besides that, I stutter. I can't talk well. Why in the world would I be the one? He probably was thinking, I tried this 40 years ago and they wouldn't accept me. What in the world would make them accept me now? But God stepped in. He said, Moses, what's that you got in your hand? Well, it's a rod. Throw it down. Well, he threw it down and it became a serpent or a snake, and Moses ran from it. I would have done the same thing. But then God said, reach down there and pick it back up. And he did. And it became his rod in his hand again. And then he said, take your hand and put it inside your garment. And he did, and took it back out, and it was as leprous as snow. He was just, his hands and arms were filled with leprosy. And then God said, put it back in. And he did, and took it out. And it was just as clean as if there'd never been anything happen. And God said, I'm sending you. But I can't talk well. I'll give you Aaron to talk for you. Just go back and take that rod, and I'm going to show you what I can do with that rod. See, it wasn't so much Moses as it was the God that he was going to lean on. And with the power of God, he would do amazing miracles before Pharaoh that would finally convince him that I want to let these people out of here, get them out. And then God would open the Red Sea and just allow them to cross over. Now, Moses had to reach out that rod and faith, and then the sea just parted and they walked through. Now, let me tell you something. Didn't mean that they walked through that into a world of luxury and everything was easy from that point on. No. They were going to spend 40 years in that wilderness. 40 years in which they would learn to trust in God. They would learn that even though they were weak, they had a God that was strong. A God that would cause their garments not to wear out, their shoes not to wear out for 40 years as they walked through that desert. A God that would give them manna from heaven to eat every day. That would provide quail to come in and just land in the area where they were so they had meat to eat. A God that would bring water out of a rock using, again, that rod that Moses had in his hand. A God that demonstrated no matter what, I can lead you to conquer. Now, eventually, he was going to lead them across the Jordan. He was going to lead them to conquer Jericho, to actually take that land of Canaan, that promised land that God had Abraham to walk through and look at all those years before. God is an amazing God. And when God is working for us, who can be against us? As a matter of fact, it just doesn't matter who's against us if God's on our side. If God's on our side, a little boy or a young teenager named David can go out with a slingshot and conquer a giant that's over 9 feet tall. When God's on our side, 300 men led by Gideon could conquer the enemy that had thousands and thousands of soldiers so that they literally filled the valley that was below them. when God's on our side. It's amazing what we can do in our lives for the Lord. No wonder when Paul was stuck in that Roman prison, and it from the point of view of everyone that would look on, it seemed like a pretty hopeless situation. And yet when Paul wrote to those Philippians, they were so worried about him and just thought, how can this happen to this great teacher and leader that has brought us to Christ? And so he writes back to him and says, I want you to know that the things that have happened to me have turned out for good. Well, how in the world? Paul said that there have been those that never would have thought about preaching the gospel, that now that I'm here and not able to do it, they're standing up to go out and preach. Now, some of them have great motives, and some of them have bad motives. But thank God that Jesus is preached one way or the other. And he'll move through that little short letter of Philippians to talk to them about God's amazing deliverance and how that when he's on our side, it really doesn't matter who's against us. He'll come finally, after challenging them in chapter 4, to rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. And let your gentleness or your moderation be known to everybody. And then don't worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests maybe be made known to God. And the peace of God that passes all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And then he said, whatever things are true, whatever things are honorable, whatever things are just, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are good report, think on these things. Focus on them. Get your mind on the things that are good and right and have to do with God. Trust him. And the God of peace will fill your hearts and minds, he says, in Christ Jesus. He'll move from that to make these two statements. I've learned in whatever state I'm in to be content. Whether I'm got plenty or I've got nothing. Whether I'm eating well or I've just got this few crumbs, I've learned whatever the situation I'm in, therein to be content. Isn't that amazing? And then he made this statement, I can do all things through Christ who gives me the strength. See, it's not a matter of what the problem is. It's a matter of who do we trust. It's a matter of who's on our side. See, if I'm serving God, and I know that I'm walking with God in my life, and I've got God on my side, listen, it just doesn't matter who's on the other side. It doesn't matter what the problems are. It doesn't matter how many enemies are out there. None of that makes any difference if God's on our side. See, the key is I need to make sure I'm on God's side so that he's on my side. And then I can walk through the trials and troubles of this life without fear, because I have God with me every day.